Hi, it's good to be together again. And we're going to continue our series in Exodus. So you can pull out a device or your Bible and start flipping to the second book in the Hebrew Scriptures, Exodus, and chapter 2. Now, when we left off, it's been a couple weeks, but we had just finished Genesis 50, where Joseph had brought his family to Egypt to be rescued from the famine. They began to multiply there. Jacob had died, and they buried him back in Hebron, and then the fathers had begun to die off there, the fathers of the tribes. And Joseph gave specific instructions to his descendants and the other descendants of Israel that you bring my bones to Canaan when God begins his exodus, that God is going to deliver you from this place and there will be an exodus. And I'm sure that sounded really odd to them because they had it good. Why would they need to be delivered from a good thing? But it didn't stay that way. And so as you flip the page to Exodus chapter 1, you realize that it's not so spiffy. In fact, the children of Israel are made slaves by a Pharaoh who didn't know all the good that Joseph had done for them. And they continued to grow. And so another Pharaoh, he comes up with this scheme that all of the Hebrew boys should be killed at birth. And he wants the Hebrew women, the midwives, to do it for him. They fear God more than they do Pharaoh. And notice the interesting twist. We'll see this continue on throughout the story. We don't know the name of what the world said was the most important person in the story, Pharaoh, but we do know the names of the two midwives who said, no, we will follow God instead. And so that's an important reminder that in God's economy, it's not the people who have name recognition in this world. It's the people who are faithful to him, even in spite of the threat of persecution. And so the Hebrews continue to grow and to become more populous. And among those boys that have the threat of death against them is this little boy, the son of two Levites. And his mother hides him for 3 months because she knows there's something special about him. And when she can't hide him any longer, she puts him in the river herself, but she puts him in a little ark. That's significant because the only other time that word is used is in Genesis, when God protects his people through the waters of death to bring them to the other side, to begin a new thing among his people, the days of Noah. And so this little boy is put in an ark and is guided through the waters. And surprise, surprise, guess of all the people who would rescue that little Hebrew boy? Pharaoh himself. Because the Pharaoh's daughter is the one who takes pity on the boy. And she, of all people, hires the little boy's mother to nurse the little boy for her. If you don't believe in God, watch, he says, I'll prove it. And so here he proves it. He is going to rescue this little boy by the most impossible of means. He's going to get Pharaoh himself to pay his mother to raise the boy for Pharaoh. This boy is special. God has a plan for him, doesn't he? Just as he does for all of us. And so he grows up and he is trained in all the ways of Pharaoh's household, the best education that the ancient world had to offer. And having learned and grown in all those ways, something still stirred within him. He knew he was different. He knew who his people were. And we're told by the New Testament authors that by faith, he chose to turn his back on the people of Egypt, on all the position, the treasures, everything that Satan could offer. Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, in order to be and identify with the people of God. And we're going to unpack that today, that choice and more. It's exciting. So Exodus chapter 2, and we're going to read some extra stuff here. So Exodus chapter 2, we're going to read beginning in verse 11, and we're going to read to the end of the chapter. So you ready? All right. So now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way. And when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" Then he said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" So Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." So he said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why is it that you've left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. And she bore him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage, and they cried out. And their cry came up to God because of the bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. This is God's word. And so he grows up here as a part of Pharaoh's household, and when he was grown, in fact, Stephen tells us in the book of Acts that it had been 40 years. He had done great exploits among the Egyptians. He was a man of prominence. He was a man respected. He was a man of accomplishment. And yet he went out to see who his people were. And he saw that they were slaves. He saw that they were abused. And as we look through this, I want you to see 3 things about Moses that are really significant. And one is that he is a natural leader. He is a natural leader. Stephen explains that, but we see it even in this, that he couldn't help but to just take the forefront. He was gifted that way by birth, naturally gifted. But also notice that he is naturally a heart for justice. He can't stand to see injustice taking place. He wants to take care of those who are weak. He wants to take care of those who are being afflicted. And lastly, we want to see that he just doesn't fit in. He kind of seems to be a stranger throughout, and we're going to unpack that as well. But we see here where he assumes leadership and he makes justice happen. As he looks and he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. Now, it's the same word there for beating that we're going to see there in verse 12 with killed, and again in verse 13. So it's kind of a general word, but it's possible that we are watching here. Moses saw this Egyptian kill one of his Hebrew kinsmen, and it smote his heart. I'm on the wrong side. I'm on the side of the oppressors. And justice swelled within him. And so he looks one way and then the other, and he He kills the Egyptian. He didn't just beat him, because we know that there's a body left over and he hides him in the sand, hoping that nobody saw. But he couldn't stop himself. And we can wrestle another time with, was this murder? Was this, Egyptian law saw it as murder. Hebrew law may have seen it as an act of retribution that was required by God's law. But either way, one, he knew he was doing something wrong because he wanted to make sure he didn't get caught. And two, it doesn't work. Because what happens then? The next day he goes out and there's two Hebrews smiting one another. Maybe that's our better word. You use the old King James, smite. And it sounds like the one is trying to kill the other. And the one who is doing the wrong, Moses says, why are you doing this? You're on the same team. And the guy says, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? A natural leader and a heart for justice. And it's already been rejected. Because the children of Israel aren't ready yet. And when Moses realizes that this guy knows that I killed the Egyptian the other day, he realizes the word is out. And that word's going to get to Pharaoh. In fact, this guy would have told Pharaoh just to get Moses off his back. And so he packs up and he flees from Egypt. Pharaoh hears of it and he seeks to kill Moses, and Moses flees from the face of Pharaoh. And he heads east. And he finds himself in the land of Midian. Now, Midian is one of the descendants of Abraham. Interesting. Archaeology has found where the Egyptians knew of the Midians that lived over there. And it seems like they may have also known that the Midians worshipped a different god than they did. One whose initials were YHWH. So, kind of interesting. YHW? So, Moses flees to the land of Midian to dwell, to remain there. And he's resting at a well. Now, remember, the people who are going to be reading this, they're familiar with the book that comes before it. And so this is like if it was a movie, it would be a trope. I mean, this is a well, really? This is a big deal. Because things happen at wells. God shows up and marriages happen. Yeah, that's kind of an odd combination perhaps. But wells are a big deal in the story. And so it is no accident that suddenly Moses is resting at a well. And we'll pack that a little later. And so let's see how it plays out. So Moses is resting at a well, and he sees these girls coming with sheep. And they draw water, and we don't know what all Moses is doing while this is going on, but they come and they draw water, and they're filling the troughs so they can water their flock. But by the time they get the troughs full, here comes these bullies, other shepherds, and they drive off the girls and their sheep, and they reap the rewards of their hard work. And apparently it's happened a lot, as we'll see here in a minute in the story. But it's really unfair. The girls did all the work, and they come in, and they're like, thanks, we're going to take it now. And so Moses arises. It says here that Moses stood up. Seriously, he didn't just stand up. He stood up for these girls, and he helped them. Big deal. Came to the rescue. And instead of the shepherds taking advantage of the girls, the shepherds are chased off, and Moses refills the troughs for the girls. He waters their flock. Now, this should ring some bells for you. I want to make sure you know that. And that Jacob had traveled a long ways and made it among some distant relatives, and he sees a girl with the flock, and he waters the flock of this girl who is Rachel, who becomes his wife eventually. And so it is Moses reenacting the story of Jacob. Whether he knew it or not, he's reenacting the story of Jacob. Because God is preparing Moses to be for the descendants of Jacob. And so he goes and he rescues these girls, waters their flock. And I want you to think about this. This is another crucial moment in the story of Moses. Earlier, when he saw an injustice, he took it upon himself and he killed a man. He didn't do that this time. He realized that that wasn't the way to fix this. He chased him off, but he didn't spill any blood. So his heart for justice has already begun to be molded in the ways of God. Secondly, notice the natural leader. He's willing to work. He is a servant leader because God is preparing Moses to be a servant as a leader. Now, the girls, they come home mysteriously early, so that's what tells you that this had happened a lot. Girls are like, oh, they're going to wait for us to show up and they're going to take the water from us that we go to all this work to draw. And today, they come home early. And Reuel, their father. Now, he's already been described as a priest of Midian. A priest. One who is an intermediary between God and man. But now we're told his name. And his name, again, we probably don't speak Hebrew, so we may not realize this, but it is friend of God. He's a friend of God and a priest. The clues just keep lining up, don't they? Because here he says, how did you come home so soon? What changed? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, the big bullies. And he also drew water for us and watered the flock. Now, go back a generation and you'll see where when the servant of Abraham went to find a bride for Isaac, that was what he was looking for, was someone who was willing to serve. And Rebekah watered not only him, but all of his camels. Well, here's this one who's willing to serve and waters their entire flock. And Reuel says to his daughters, where is he? Why did you leave him? Call him. We'll feed him. Bring him in. We can have fellowship with this one. And it was right for them to wait for Dad to do the invite. They can't just invite some random guy home, even if he is nice to him. They're under their father's protection. And so Moses, it says, was content to live with the man. And the man gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. And she bore him a son, and he called his name Gershom. For he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And I want you to just notice the heart of Moses here. He was among the Israelites, but he didn't grow up among them. He was a stranger in the house of Pharaoh because he was an Egyptian, even in their house. When he went to go claim the people of Israel, they rejected him. Who made you ruler and judge? And so he flees to Midian, a place that is not his own. But there he finds hospitality and family. And skipping ahead, we'll see where God really does provide a family in the house of the Midians for Moses. But God provides a way. Now, there's some things going on here, though, that I think are important. The Midianites, as I mentioned, they're descendants of Abraham. They're fellow Semites. But he's going to learn some things here that are really essential to what is going on in God's timing. Because for starters, we're told by Stephen, this is another 40 years. So Moses was 40-ish when this happened. Now it's another 40 years living among the Midianites. What is he gaining? He had the natural gifts already. He already had training. He had the inclination to lead. What else did he need? He needed to learn the ways of God. He needed to learn the ways of God. And God, how do you do things? And so God brings him to one of his friends, a friend of God, a priest, because Moses needs to learn about the priesthood. He brings him, well, as you'll see in the next chapter, to the mountain of God, in order that God might be able to meet with Moses there. God has a plan, and he's preparing his servant, because the most important part in this is to abide with God. Moses, you have what is naturally given to be the leader, but now you need to know, I don't do things man's way. God does things his own way. And so Moses is going to spend another 40 years being prepared to be a shepherd. And that's another trope. That's another design pattern in the scriptures, shepherds. God has a heart for shepherds because God is the shepherd. And Moses is going to work as a shepherd for a priest at the foot of the mountain of God. Because God is getting Moses away from the world, which is always represented by Egypt, to a place where Moses can hear God. But there's another thing going on here, because I'm going to assume you know a little bit of the story of Moses anyways. And that is that I want you to see the big pattern here that's coming up. There is a Jewish deliverer. He is rejected by his own nation. Rejected by his own nation, he leaves the world. And he goes to shepherd sheep of another fold. That one day there'll be one flock, but he goes to shepherd sheep of another fold. Gentiles, no less. But they're Gentiles who know the true God. And this deliverer will have a Gentile bride until the time comes that God will send the deliverer back to rescue his chosen people, to bring them to himself with a mighty hand, to learn the proper worship of God. And why is he waiting? The last 3 verses here tell us why. God was waiting for them to want to be rescued. This is the first time since before Exodus 1. In all of Exodus, this is the first time in their slavery that the children of Israel finally cry out to God, because they're done making bricks for Pharaoh. They want to be rescued. And they're ready for God to do it. They're ready to ask. Because the big design pattern, did you catch it as I explained it to you? God has sent a better deliverer. And even though in his first coming he was rejected by his own people, he still goes and leaves this world, ascends the mountain, so to speak, ascends on high. And what is he doing now? Shepherding sheep of another fold who are made up of Gentiles, the church, who is the Gentile bride of Christ. But God's not done with his chosen people. He's going to send the deliverer back to rescue them with a mighty hand and unmistakable power, that his name may be praised, that all the world will know he is the Lord. And what is he waiting for? Waiting out for his people to be ready to be rescued, to cry out to him and actually ask to be rescued. Where are you in this story? Have you cried out to God for rescue? Are you done making bricks for Pharaoh? Are you ready for the rescuer to come and lead us to God, that we may know him and worship him rightly? Because the rescue that's coming is God is bringing his people to himself. And next week, that's what we're going to look at, is God's encounter at the mountain of God with Moses. His commission to send his deliverer to go get his people. Because Moses has a role to play. 40 years in the wilderness shepherding sheep, he's ready to bring God's people out of Egypt and do it in a way that points to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, our true deliverer. This is exciting stuff for me. I hope you got a little bit of that excitement as well, as we see how God is working. God met Moses at the well. He wasn't done with Moses, and he wasn't done with his children. And he was working in the most mysterious of ways to further his plan. Let's be about the Father's business. And let's not grow weary in doing good, for in due time we'll see his hand. God bless. Thank you for joining me. I love our Bible study times together, and we'll see you soon.